Welcome to the Life Career Roadmap for Newcomers. And today I have a special guest, Ken Chong. So Ken, welcome to the Life Career Roadmap YouTube channel.
Thank you for having me, Sema. Much appreciated.
No, thank you for coming. So Ken, as normally I start my sessions here, my chat with my guests, I would like to ask you where you come from and what's your professional background?
Yep, I am from Malaysia, specifically Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. I grew up there and lived there until I was 18 years old. And my background is that I came here as an international student to study law and commerce. And right now I'm a practicing migration lawyer in Perth. I've been in this field for about 4.5 years now.
Oh, wonderful. So Ken, back home in Singapore, Malaysia, sorry. I always get Singapore and Malaysia.
That's like, okay, we're very close and
we talked about. So when you are back home, so what made you to choose law as a profession? Was someone who influenced you, or any movie that you saw, or your peers or teachers? What was the catalyst situation for you to decide, I want to be a lawyer?
Okay, so this is an interesting question, quite the long story though. First of all, I'll just get it off my chest. My father is a lawyer and he still is a lawyer. He has been practicing for over, I think 30 plus years now.
Mm-hmm.
And but the point I'm trying to make is that he wasn't the reason I decided to become a lawyer. I actually wanted to become a doctor before anything. I wanted to become like a medical doctor. That was my goal. I did all the science subjects in school, and then on to pre-university, I also did all the science subjects. So I was definitely going towards that direction. But I went for this workshop, I think it was a 3-day workshop at a medical university in Malaysia, and had some chats with some of the students there and also the staff there, the lecturers there, and kind of got a bit more understanding of what it meant to be a doctor. Because at the time I was just like, I want to help people, I want to do what I can to make people's lives better, and I'll get back to that point in a bit. But yes, so I felt like being a doctor was really the best way to personally be able to improve people's lives, because we're dealing with health, right? Physical health, and mental health. That's obviously a big thing, when it comes to anyone's well-being. So that was my dream, growing up and being in high school. And then, but talking to these, students, medical students and lecturers, though, they gave me a different view of what it meant to be a doctor and a medical student. As an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, I was a bit, let's just say I was a bit turned off. I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but yeah, a little bit turned off by the fact that, it takes an extremely long time to become a consultant, a specialist. I think 10 years is the minimum, since the beginning of university. And also, the life of a doctor is not easy. You're spending really most of your time at the hospital and doing training, and obviously having to deal with your exams outside of it. Medical school is also not easy. You're again nonstop in labs, nonstop, preparing for the next test. So let's just say as a 17-year-old, I was a bit wary of that, because I still wanted to have my social life. I wanted to be able to get out and explore the world and be a young adult, right, basically. So that kind of scared me a little bit. I was like, do I really want to give up all of that? I'm so young. I want to explore. I want to go out. I don't want to just stay in a university and get stuck in the hospital all day. So I kind of thought, you know what? And then also at the time in Malaysia, there was a lot of news going around about the oversupply of medical graduates, meaning a lot of medical grads just could not get their a traineeship. They were just like hanging around waiting for an opportunity to come along. So that kind of scared me, because I was like, if I'm going to spend so much money, well, not me, my parents were going to spend so much money, and I was going to have to put in all this time and effort and all the sacrifice to do that, to do those studies, then at least I want to see some sort of outcome out of it, right? I want to see a reward. So obviously as a 17, 18-year-old, I was like, yeah, what else would be good for me? So I started this obviously conversation with my father, and I also went to lots of education fairs and spoke to a few people. And my dad was instrumental in letting me know that he thought law would be appropriate, for me, because he thought that I was, really good at speaking, English particularly, because English is really linguistics is such a big part of being a lawyer.
Yes.
And he always felt that my English was really my strong point, even though I didn't really speak it for the first 12 years of my life.
You
did. Yeah. So I really
after.
I really picked up English from secondary school onwards, because before that I was in Chinese school, so I just spoke Mandarin, right? And a bit of broken like Malaysian English here and there. But yeah, so he thought that I was good at linguistics, and I loved reading at the time as well. Throughout my life, I've always really liked reading, whether it was storybooks, novels, or just general encyclopedias, Wikipedia, that sort of thing. So he thought that law would be a good career choice for me, but at the same time, I was like, do I really want to be a lawyer? I don't really know much about being a lawyer. At 18 years old, what do you really know? Then my dad suggested, oh, well, why not do a second degree then, do a second degree in addition to law, then that might potentially broaden your opportunities, and also your knowledge as well. So I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty convincing. You know what, you're my dad, so I respect and I listen, and I know that you're more experienced, so I'll just go with whatever you think is good. And at the time, as most 18-year-olds are, you don't really know what else you can do. I was passionate in music because I play guitar, and I've had played it for a few years at that time. Wanted to also get into that, but at the same time, let's just say in most like Asian Chinese families, it's not generally something that would be encouraged, because people want you to do like the classic professional.
Of course, it's a profession, yeah.
That's right.
You can get a job, right?
That's right. For them, it's about stability. So basically doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants. These are the big four in Asian culture.
You're Latin American too.
Oh yeah, okay. High five. Okay, good to know that we share that our parents share that sort of view, although that is changing now, which is I think it's a good thing. But yeah, I was kind of like, yeah, me the best. So I just kind of went with it. That's why I decided to choose law. And it wasn't like a conscious decision on my part. Like I said, I wanted to be a doctor. But it just kind of, at 18 years old, what do you really know? So that's the honest story of how I ended up studying law. And then obviously took up a Bachelor of Commerce as well, in addition to that. And that was a major in international business, which I was kind of interested in as well, because I like that cross-cultural aspect of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in this case, you then migrate to Australia to do your courses. And why Australia? Why not staying back home and doing law? And why Australia was something that attracted you to here?
Yeah. Okay. So with choosing Australia, that was really the next question that came up. After choosing the course, where would I go? At that time, I'd already completed my pre-university course, which was the South Australian equivalent of Year 12, really. They offer these things in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. And my father has always been very, let's say, in a way biased, I guess, towards Australia. Well, I mentioned earlier that he himself is a graduate of University of Sydney Law School. Mm-hmm. Was it Sydney University? Whichever. So he obviously spent some time in Australia as well, and he had a really good impression. And he only went back to Malaysia because he wanted to get married to my mother and have a family there.
Mhm.
So that was already, he had that sort of preconception that it was a good place to study. Why not Malaysia though? Generally, it's about career opportunities in Malaysia. When I first came to Australia when I was 18, I did not have the conception that I was going to be migrating here. It was just do my studies, finish it up, and see where we go from there. In fact, the intention was probably to go back, after finishing up the studies. Career opportunities, when I say that, I mean in Malaysia, and I think a lot of Asian countries, and probably in Latin America as well. I've got a few Latin American friends. There is this perception that these Anglo universities, like universities in Anglo countries, are viewed as more desirable, like graduates of those universities or colleges or anything are more desirable because they have obviously the prestige and the name, associated with a lot of these institutions. And that's why, Melbourne U is so popular because it's one of the top universities in the world. And, Sydney U, UNSW, Monash, all of these universities have such a reputation where I come from.
Yes.
And when it comes to looking for work, when an employer is presented with the options of going with either a local university graduate versus an overseas like Australian, UK, or US or Canadian graduate, they would usually pay more attention and give priority to the overseas graduate as versus the Malaysian graduate. That's what it is. And I think that is probably based on and I guess an understanding, not necessarily an understanding, or at least the preconception that overseas graduates are better than
Perception
local.
that they created.
Yeah, that's the perception that they have anyway. And I think it's probably based on some degree of reality, when they actually start working and their knowledge and the rest of it. My father himself, he's also an employer, so he would know, kind of which graduates are better than others, when they actually start working, right? So I think that is the reason why, that is another reason why we chose Australia. Another reason would be the fact that it's very close.
Yeah,
very close by.
How many hours from here, from Perth to?
5.5. So quick.
It's like going to Sydney.
Essentially, yeah. You go across from east to west Australia. That probably takes about the same time as it takes to get to like Bali or Singapore. So that was probably another big factor. I knew that I was going to miss my family. I'd always been very close to them. So being able to be, in terms of distance, quite close, meant that I could just travel back and forth without too much hassle, right? That's why I always admire people like yourself and my friends from like Colombia and Argentina. Like you've come across the world to, to come to Australia, and that's so impressive because it's such a long flight. So so that was another reason as well. I don't know if you're going to ask me why I chose Perth in particular,
as well, because Perth, I believe, is the same direction there, right? So you get is the same direction as
same time zone as a lot of Asian countries, but Perth particularly was because I had I have relatives here.
Okay.
Yeah. So I knew that, I think my parents knew that moving to a new country, that I've really never really been before would be quite the challenge. It's a culture shock, as would be the case for most migrants. So I think they felt that having relatives here in Perth would be very helpful in terms of the transition. You're just helping me make feel a little bit more like home, because I've got people from the same country and same culture and everything else.
Having a good food, then we can go for dinner with the family.
That's right. And they obviously know the ropes. They know how it's like to live here and where to get this, where to get that. So I think that brings me to my point I'm trying to make as well, is that it's very important to have support, as migrants when you come to a new country. I think a big part of your work is in relation to that. That's why I was so impressed when you told me about what you did at the beginning, and doing this as well, of course.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I admire
Yeah,
you guys because we're facilitating people to understand their
yeah,
possibilities in here. So, Ken, coming back also, moving now to Australia as a young man, a teenager that just is still a teenager when you came to Australia, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
coming to Australia, even though that you had a support of family, the extended family
yeah,
here in
yeah,
Perth,
yeah.
did you face any cultural shock or roadblocks that you thought, did I really make the good choice in my life coming to this place, doing what I'm doing? So did you any point in time doubt your decision?
The starting point of that is that I didn't really doubt the decision as such. Um, yes, I did experience things that made me feel like, oh, what's going on here, but it didn't really make me doubt my decision at first, because I was only a student. So it was temporary by nature. I knew that I would, I didn't know whether or not I was going to stay on after I'd finished my course, right? But there were definitely several things that I felt were a bit shocking, that I did not experience in growing up in KL. Um, Particularly, I think they would, well, a lighter one would be the fact that everything closes so soon. I'm sure this is a very common
Yeah.
sentiment across,
It's even better now, Ken. When I came to Australia 25 years ago, I was
right.
like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, you just
Nowadays you
couldn't
have,
do anything at night.
no, you have the little supermarkets now. Before we didn't have anything. It was,
Right.
and
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you in Perth as well?
yes, I am. I am.
Yes,
And
yes.
then when I arrived, I
So
tell you one thing, when I arrived here, I arrived on early May, in April, and then got us a week to rent a house. So as a good Brazilian, I had to clean everything to get everything shining and
yeah,
smelling
yeah,
good. And then I remember the Saturday, I said, oh, everything's fine. So 5 p.m., I took a shower and we went to the shops to buy food, to buy things for the house. And then you arrive there, a shopping center with the empty parking. No
yeah,
one's in there.
yeah,
What is going on here? What is
yeah,
happening? So, and
yeah.
then realize that nothing opens after, it's open after 5. And there
Hmm.
was Saturday. Sunday, there is nothing, means that you have to eat what you have. Nothing.
Yeah,
Then
yep,
that's what you
yep.
had.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm sure it's improved leaps and bounds since that time. But
Yeah.
even when I came, yeah, that was 10 years ago now, 10 and a half years ago now. Yeah, I also was shocked, because it was the common culture. It is the common culture for things to open till late, regardless of what it is, whether or not it's to get a haircut or to just get something to eat or to do your late night shopping. Most shopping centers in KL close at midnight.
Mhm.
Um, and and also there are 24-hour joints, which are very, very common, very, very common. So it's kind of like people start coming out at night rather than actually closing shop at night, right? So that was probably the biggest culture shock. The fact that it was so quiet after hours, because I'm a night owl. I've always been one. Um, so to see everything just die down after 5 p.m. was probably quite hard to get used to, probably for the first year or second year, because that's when we were frantically looking for all the 24-hour joints, in Perth. I think there was only like one or two, and then the Spud Shed, obviously, which is open 24/7.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were just doing that, and as students as well, we tend to be more nocturnal anyway,
Yeah.
because that's when everyone is a bit more keen to hang out, and everyone's just sleeping during the day. It's just how it is, when you're like 19.
That's
Yeah,
right.
so that was probably the biggest culture shock. But sorry, not the biggest, but one of the factors that one of the things that I was not used to when coming to Australia. But eventually I got over it, and pretty used to it now, and it's gotten better. Obviously, you get food delivery now, and you've got places that are open late night shopping once a week, that sort of thing. So it's gotten better over the time, but I imagine the eastern states are probably a bit further ahead in that respect. Melbourne and Sydney, Brisbane. So that is probably one of the lighter culture shocks that I faced. The other thing that I didn't find so pleasant personally was the fact that people could so freely express themselves, meaning they would have no regard for what was going on around them. Say in a public place, right? People would just shout, or cuss, or say things that really are very, very insensitive, or just plain offensive, just antisocial behavior. That was something that I have to say that I didn't really see in KL, because I think there was that culture of being more restrained, in most Asian cultures. There's no like, oh, you say whatever you want, freedom of speech. Whereas here, I think people tend to be a bit more willing to express, their frustrations. And of course, drinking in public is not uncommon here as well. So that I think contributes to that. That said, though, I do think that is the minority of the people that you meet here, because everywhere else you go, people are definitely friendlier. Yeah, that was another culture shock as well, because when you go to shops, people are so willing to serve you, so willing to help you out. Whereas in Malaysia, it's like, oh, you do what you need to do. If you need help, come and see me. But if you see me, I'll probably have a long face anyway. So that's another difference. Yeah, I'd say.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so those are two examples I can think of at the moment. Yeah. And of course, everything's just a bit cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that you say that, because yesterday I was facilitating a workshop in Australian workplace culture. And we had people from Malaysia as well, from India, from Singapore, from Colombia, from Iran, and bringing this point that what makes Australia so different and so similar at the same time to where we come from. So, and the beauty of the differences when we can understand the full context, not just one behavior, but the full context where it comes from. So yeah, it's very interesting. And the shock, it's really like, did you see people walking barefoot in the shopping centers and like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah, or even shirtless for that matter.
Yes.
Yeah. Like just going around. Yeah, that was odd to me as well. Yeah, I also found it like, what's going on? Like, where are your clothes? Where are your shoes? Yeah.
So, and then going through your studies and finishing off your degree, what made you to stay? Because your idea was, I come and I study, and probably doing the same as your father, just came to upskill and have the best education and then going back.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to stay?
Okay, so staying in Australia, that was, let's say it was something that I was not sure about, even as recent as completing my university studies. There is this pathway called a temporary graduate visa, that people can apply for after they've completed a course of study in Australia that meets the required standards and length of time. So for me at that stage, it was just more about trying to see what I could do, with the degree that I had gotten, from an Australian university, and kind of see where it would bring me, whether or not I'd be able to even get a job in the first place. Because the way I saw it is that even if I could not stay here, because there was no visa pathway or anything, at least I would have had that time to get some work experience that I could potentially bring back to Malaysia and improve my career prospects. Okay. So the turning point for me was, I think, when I started working, really, when I started working and when I became a law clerk, that's part of the mandatory requirements to become like a lawyer, a practicing lawyer in Australia, is that you have to finish a period of practical legal training, So I was a law clerk at the time, and I think what sort of really drew me towards staying was the fact that there is this bigger emphasis on work-life balance. You know, there was a, I was working in a firm where really, well, her as well. I was working with Sophie at the time, when I was only 23 years old. And she was always my boss, she was always very concerned, about the fact that I was staying back, after hours to do more work. And she would always encourage me, don't stay too late, just go home, you're not meant to be working, we're not even paying you for this extra time. Because, it's just, I think as people from my culture would understand, there is this desire to go beyond, the bare minimum, so that's what I felt I should do. I felt like I needed to prove my worth, to prove that I was very hardworking and very dedicated, to everything that I was doing, right? But we had talks about this, and what she said was true, is that, you can't keep on pushing yourself to the absolute limit, every time. If you have to stay back on rare occasions, that's fine. You got to do what you got to do. But it's not about constantly, going to the absolute maximum, at all times. You want to be able to also enjoy a life outside of work. And I think that has always been repeated, regardless of which workplace I'm in. Currently in Tang Law, the same as well. My bosses are also the same. They also say the same things to me. You live not to work, but you work to live. Your work is the service that you're providing in exchange for a better life outside of work.
That's right.
Right. So I think that was probably the biggest drawing point, because in Malaysia, I actually I have always known this, looking at my father's own working hours. He would start at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and then he would come back at precisely like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So 12-hour work days are pretty much the norm. And people, your clients, your customers, they can always reach you no matter what time of the day it is. So I didn't really, although that was the norm, in Malaysia, that didn't really quite speak to me, because I was like, yeah, it sounds really good. I can just not have to worry about work, once I'm off work, and my employers actually encourage this, so that's great. I get to pursue my hobbies. I get to focus on family, house things, basically things that we all live for, right? We don't live for work, most of the time. Work is a means to getting a better life, through the money that we earn, right?
Yes, that's right.
So that was probably the biggest drawing point. I was like, yeah, you know what? I've already worked this hard and this long. I've already been here for 5 years, studying my double degree. So why not try and take it further to see where I go? Just keep on, really try to find the limits of my potential lie, So for me, the natural choice was to see whether or not I could get a job in Australia, and obviously try and see whether or not I could get permanent residence as well. The other perks that come with it, obviously, is the fact that, in Australia, obviously, we earn a lot more money than a lot of people in the rest of the world. And our currency is not the best now, but it's still relatively strong, really, compared to a lot of other currencies. So purchasing power is necessarily a big advantage as well, because I like my toys, right? I like my guitars, I like my clothes.
The lifestyle.
Yeah, that's it. So that was, I think, for me, the biggest thing. And also, the clean air, was a big part. I've always had, sinus issues growing up in Malaysia because of the humidity and also the smog, in the city. So these were probably the main sort of factors that made me decide, what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna try. If I really don't make it at the end of the day, at least I've given it a shot.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's probably the reason.
That's so honest, because you touched a few things that I'd like to mention here that I see a lot with my clients and people that attend my workshops. What happens is, because you come from a culture that you are not allowed to leave your job or the work before your boss. So it's very observant, like you need to be there every time, doesn't matter. You don't earn more for that, but you are used to work more because you're very competitive and you need to be there. Otherwise, you're not there for you. that is
Yeah.
opposite in Australia. So, and also coming to a new country, you come because you want a better, you come here for a better life. You don't come here to be below what you have done before. You want to
Absolutely.
grow up.
That's the whole point of migration. It's
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah.
And then what I see a lot with my more than 20 years experience working with newcomers is they come to a new country that is a first world country with the dream of having that life, that lifestyle, that possibilities. But they come and for some reason they become a second-class citizen. And how they see themselves as a second-class. They cannot move forward. They see people, the natives or people that live in the country better than themselves. They don't see possibilities. They see that they don't have opportunities. And when the racism start coming as a perception for them that they don't have the chance. But then they spend their lives suffering, ruminating their decision, and putting all the bad results that they have in their lives in the new system of the country, instead of thinking what I could have done differently.
That's right.
Possibilities.
Yeah. The mindset is so important. Yeah.
That's right. So what I see a lot is this second-class citizen syndrome that many newcomers, they embrace because they come to a place that they want to have that lifestyle. And for some reason, lifestyle and career seems that they are not together for them. And career is your lifestyle. You choose the career because you want that lifestyle that supports your lifestyle. Yeah. And when you do something, you do because you are helping others. Doesn't matter if you are cleaning a bathroom, you are helping people to have a clean bathroom.
Clean bathroom. That's right.
You are selling the product, the service of any organization with your skills. So Absolutely. Why not investing to bring your best skills, your best qualifications to the table and contribute, instead of being, no, I don't have a chance because people don't like migrants, because this, because of that. So all the excuse at the same time. So you touched base in very important point. That is the migration. You want to migrate because you want something better, because you were not happy where you were doing whatever you were. So you want something more. And you
That's right.
Searching for something more.
That's right.
Yeah, so well done. Well done that you figure things out very quickly in your life. And
well, yeah, living alone for years on end, without any support, real support, from my parents or anyone else, does teach you a lot of things. I absolutely would say that. But yeah, it's a great point you mentioned. The opportunities are there. I'm not going to deny that there are ceilings at times, based on the fact, any migrant can attest to this, there will be situations where there will be ceilings simply because of maybe your skin color or your background, or maybe, because English is not your first language. There will always be that, no matter where you go. It's not that Australia is unique in this respect, but I think you touch on a really good point. It's up to you, it's up to the individual prospective migrant to find the opportunities that they feel are going to bring them forward in their life, but even, if they were stuck in a, what is perceived as a lower end job, like being a cleaner, that's not really a bad thing either, because in Australia, one of the good things is that, people are treated more equally regardless of their standing in society. That is the egalitarian society that Australia has. We don't look down on cleaners simply because they're clean. We see them as doing a very important role in our society. Right. Like you said, that's right. And if you want to move up from that, you can always, from being a cleaner, I've seen this as well, with my clients as well. They were students, they were doing cleaning as a part-time job. And then once they finished their studies, they decided to take it to the next level. They built their connections, they spoke to people, they got into with like-minded individuals, and then they decided to start a business, a cleaning business even. That's relevant to.
So many newcomers do that as well, right?
That's right. They know the ins and outs of how it works, and they're willing to try something that they may not have done before. They've accumulated enough capital to do that through all their hard work. So it's up to, I think, people to find and create those opportunities for themselves, rather than necessarily complaining about, I'm worse off because I'm not white, because I'm not Australian, because I'm not English speaking. A lot of I think people who have done really well in terms of entrepreneurs in Perth are in fact migrants,
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, because they saw an opportunity. They saw
Yes.
a blue ocean when everything else was red, and they just took it and tried. Really, I think that sort of fighting spirit is very important when you're in a new country. Like, where do you see yourself going? What sort of opportunities do you think could be beneficial as far as bringing yourself ahead? I never imagined that I would have this day where I'm, working in a, quite a pretty big, largest, sort of Asian-centric law firm in Perth, having a steady flow of clients, being able to advise on lots and lots of migration issues, earning a fairly, decent income that's more than enough to support, myself and my wife who recently moved here. So these are the things, that you have to have that dream and then find ways to realize that dream, and I think knowing the right people is absolutely critical, in this. So don't just keep to yourself is what I'd say. Don't just keep to yourself and complain and ruminate about what's going on in your life. Go out there and talk to people and get to know the right people. You never know what connections you might make that might lead you to opportunities, because in Perth particularly, it's such a small community, so who is often more important than what you know. So
That's right.
so obviously being able to present that as well. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So yeah, I do agree with absolutely everything you mentioned.
Me too with you, because there are roadblocks, there are things that are in front of you that you feel horrible,
Yeah.
shock for you. But it's up to you to see things where you can get a different route and
Yeah.
make yourself being where you feel worthy of your life in a new country.
Yeah.
It's right, it's your choice, right? But I know many people, they go down and they feel low and they start complaining and they stay inside of their own ethnic community groups. And
Yeah. Yeah.
really getting the point that I came here for a better life and I make it.
That's it.
You take time, but you make it, right?
That's it. You got to be patient. You got to stand your ground. You got to know what your values are, and most of all, you have to be persistent. That's how every migrant who makes it here in Australia makes it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Ken, then you finished your degree, decide to stay. And what was the decision about doing migration law? Was your experience going through the situation of being a migrant, a student, international student, and seeing the possibility of staying and getting the experience of working in Australia? Was that
Partially, yes. In no small part, definitely. The practical reason for getting into migration, though, was more because I kind of happened to fall into it in a sense. But the reason I stuck with it is because of what you just said, because I relate to it personally and I feel like I'm helping people. So going back again to my desire to help people through the work that I do, because I want to be a doctor at first. But at the time, I had just finished university. I was looking for work. Remember how I said I was looking for anything at all that could get my foot in the door. So it just so happened that this specialist migration law firm in Perth was quite a small one, Rothstein Lawyers. They were one of the very first people to approach me and ask me to go in for an interview. And I very much clicked instantly with the way they did things and the way they saw things. For them, it was not so much about you really earning as much money as they can off, migrants, but really trying to help them achieve that better life. And that sort of spoke to me personally as someone who had come from overseas, right? So yeah, of course I took it on, because they were one of the very first, and I felt very comfortable with them. There were a couple others as well. I wanted to do areas of law that use my skills and expertise to help people, so not so much a fan of the rich people fighting rich people type of thing, litigation. Nothing against litigation lawyers, by the way, absolutely brilliant lawyers. But I couldn't see myself doing that because I wanted to help, through my skills, people who really, really need that help, what could I do to turn their lives around, make it better? So I was considering obviously migration at the time already. But I was also looking at things like, maybe personal injury, because I had some exposure to that when I was clerking and interning during uni. So these two areas, I think, were what I was looking at, helping the not disadvantaged, I guess the people who genuinely, want to improve their circumstances, want to be in a better position. So, and things that affect them very personally, of course, personal injury, it's about their life, generally. And then migration is about which country they're going to be living in, which is obviously the biggest decision anyone can make in their life.
It's love getting married to someone, right? For the rest of your life. Maybe not.
Well, at least for the foreseeable future, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's the thing. You wouldn't make the move unless you were pretty committed to it. That's the thing. Yeah. You'd have to cut off so many ties. You'd have to go through so many obstacles, so many sacrifices to move. Leaving one's family, that's never easy, especially in cultures where family is a very important thing, like such as mine. Yeah, same for you as well. Sort of the impetus to going towards migration. And then I started doing it, obviously. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I actually quite like this. I actually enjoy it, and then, I felt like I was pretty okay at it. I was progressing pretty well, according to my boss at the time. So, yeah, I just kind of thought, you know what, I'm just going to do the best I can, and then, yeah, that's how I started becoming a migration lawyer. And then I've done it ever since, really. Yep.
And now you are working with Sophie. So Sophie, I met Sophie probably in 2017.
Okay.
Because I had one not-for-profit organization, self-funded, where I was educating newcomers how to run business in Australia based on my own failure. Run my first business in Australia in 2010.
Yeah.
So I decided that my academia life had no purpose anymore because I want to be with people. And I was a researcher. I was behind the scenes in the computer.
You were what, sorry?
I was a medical researcher.
Medical researcher.
And then I was researching epidemiological situations. And I decided I didn't want to be behind the scenes anymore. I was a people's person since my life. I wanted to help people.
Yeah, hands-on, actually dealing with grassroots. Yeah.
And then I decided, no, I need to teach people what I know and how they can succeed based on my own failures. What I learned losing money and losing everything, even my identity, when I lost my business, when I couldn't go ahead. Yeah. So I decided to create, I self-funded this to help people, and it took me 2 years, and I had help from the City of Joondalup, from Ed Cowan University, also TAFE, everyone was involved. And I brought the first multicultural business expo in Australia that was multicultural, specifically for multicultural businesses. And Sophia was coming to the events, the networking events that I was running. And then when I met her, and I was very impressed with her way of approaching people and talking to people and giving information to people. So I got connected on LinkedIn. And then when, yeah, so it has been a story in there.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that you two went so far back, That's impressive. Absolutely. I agree with you. Sophie is a great person to talk to. She's understanding. And I think that's probably why I've stuck with her for so long.
That's good.
Yeah. But yeah, no, she was, I owe a great deal to her. And she was really the one, when I mentioned earlier that someone approached me, and one of the first people approached me, that was Sophie. So that's why the firm that I've worked with from the start, after graduating from university, that was Sophie's firm, Rothstein Lawyers. Okay. And then when Sophie decided to sell the business to Tang Law, I naturally went along, because I felt like I had still a lot to learn at the time. Yeah.
Hey, wonderful. So I see things around. So that's very nice. So in this case, can I get some information about your qualifications, or your knowledge in qualifications recognition in Australia, as you have been through this, and also skills assessment, because it's something that I receive lots of message, people asking me about this information. And me as a career counselor, I have the knowledge, but I believe I'm not the person to give advice. I can present the information, but I'm not the one specialized and say, oh, this is the best opportunity for you, because there's so many things involved in a decision of applying for a visa that is connected to your qualification, or having your skills assessment if you want to go through this pathway, but it's still depending on getting your permanent visa. So can we go through this? Take the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So just so I understand the question correctly, you're asking about what sort of pathways are available to people who have qualifications and
I have
skills.
questions here if you want for me to go through them, so be more specific to you. So
yeah, because I want to know exactly what the question is so I can answer them in a very direct way. Yeah.
Questions that I have here, right? One is, what are the different types of work visas available in Australia, and how they differ from each other?
Okay, so when it comes to visas that are based on work, okay, and skills in general, okay, it all starts with your occupation. The occupation list or lists that the Department of Home Affairs uses is based on this classification called ANZSCO, ANZSCO, Australia and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations. So that's like a kind of the Bible of all the occupations that they determine or deem exist in Australia and New Zealand. Okay, so the occupation lists is really the government's way of deciding which occupations are most in demand in Australia, whether that's for the short term or for the long term. There are talks, though, this advice has been true for as long as I can remember, but there are talks, though, of taking out the skilled occupation lists. So this advice may not be applicable in a couple of months, okay? So that's when obviously someone like me, I'd be, very updated with the changes, and I'll obviously re-inform again, in a future session. But as the situation as it stands at the moment is that you need to have an occupation, a migrant needs to have an occupation that belongs on that skilled occupation list. Okay, so the trick there is finding the ANZSCO occupation that pertains to your qualifications and work experience, and then seeing whether or not that occupation is present on the list. Because if it's on the list, depending on which list, that opens up different skilled visa options to you. Okay. So when it comes to skilled visas, there are two types. There are two broad types anyway. There are your employer-sponsored visa categories. That's where you have an employer already in Australia who's willing to go through the process to nominate you, give you a job, and really tell the department that they want you to work for them. And that's why the department wants to give you a visa. So that's your employer-sponsored categories. And then you have the other big group, which is based on credentials, individual credentials, okay? So there is this thing called the points test, which is again due to change in the near future because of the revamp in the migration system that the government wants to implement. But yes, credentials meaning things like your age, your level of English, how much work experience do you have, what your highest level of qualification is, whether or not you studied in Australia before, whether or not you are single or have a partner. So these are all things that would affect your point score. The higher your point score, the higher the chances of you being invited to apply for one of these independent skilled visas, is what we call them. Okay, so that's the general basis of it, without obviously delving into the minor details.
So that is subclass visas that then goes.
Yes, when you go further, it's the subclasses, and each subclass obviously has its different requirements.
So another question that I get here, so someone who is skilled, wanting to come to Australia, the question is better to apply for my skills assessment or Australian or qualification recognition before I come to Australia or after I come to Australia?
Okay, when it comes to skills assessments, it really depends on the visa. Certain skilled visas require a skills assessment in order for it to be granted. All of the points tested visas require it, the ones that I just mentioned before. So to be specific, 189, 190, and 491. And for the employer-sponsored visas, most of them also require a skills assessment, except for the short-term temporary skills shortage visa, 482. So it's better to get the skills assessment done as soon as you can, really. That is my advice, because that will just really take that thing in terms of things you need to worry about for the visa application, which in itself is already, pretty heavy, right? So if you can get that skills assessment done, then you won't have to worry about, meeting it when you apply for the visa. There is a validity period though. Most of the time it's 3 years. So obviously don't do it more than 3 years before you intend to migrate. But within that 3 years, you're fine. You can use it for the visa application.
Okay. And so the other situation is like for people that want to study in Australia. So they have a qualification already back home. So the question is, the skill assessment is done by an organization that does normally the assessment for the visas, or is done by the university that they want to go to study?
I don't think universities require skills assessments. The
qualification recognition.
You mean to get it recognized in Australia, though?
Let's say I had my master's degree in epidemiology and I want to do a PhD. So they had, I didn't do the normal general graduation or qualification assessment or recognition, because I sent all my documents to university, and they have a system that they see where you come from, your university and your scores and everything. So, and then they grant you the opportunity to come to study.
The offer of enrollment, right?
Enrollment. So, but after you do your course here, there is another question. When you are from overseas and you come to do a course here, do you need to go through the qualification recognition or assessment of your skills as well? Or is done, you study and you are granted your qualification?
That would come down to the individual institution offering the course. They would have their own individual entry requirements. Okay. That's obviously in the case of a student who wants to come to Australia to study. Then obviously the university or the college, they would decide whether or not your previous qualification would meet the bare minimum entry requirements for their course. This is a different concept from skills assessments. Obviously, skills assessments are different. They just it's more to assess whether or not you have the right qualifications and the right skills to do the occupation that you're being nominated for. But if you're talking about studying in Australia, then they're all determined by the individual institutions, and it's up to you to obviously maybe speak to an education agent to see which ones might be accepting people with your qualification, or you can do your own research in that regard. And most of the time, based on my understanding, they actually look at the individual subjects that you've completed rather than the title of the qualification itself.
The equivalent that they need to see what people.
That's it, because they just want to make sure you have the right knowledge and the right background to actually do the course, because it's actually done, I guess, in the student's best interest as well. Because if they don't have the prerequisites, then it would be very difficult for them to do the course, because the course might touch on concepts that they assume you already know. So that's the idea behind, I think, the prerequisites for,
Well, let's say, despite you have another degree back home, but you come to Australia, you do a degree. After you finish a degree here, do I need to go to recognition, or is necessary? Or because some people come to me and say, I have done a course here. Now I need to apply for recognition of my skills and qualification. So because they thought initially, no one told them about this, and they thought was straightforward. I do a course and I get recognized.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you mean. Okay, so people who have done courses in Australia, most of the time they are trying to get usually a type of positive skills assessment outcome from a body like maybe VetAssess or Engineers Australia, that sort of thing. The unfortunate bit is that lots of courses aren't necessarily, even if they're offered in Australia, aren't necessarily recognized as like accredited. They don't have that accredited status by a lot of the skills assessing bodies in Australia. Unfortunately, I think it's a financial thing more than anything else.
Okay.
But in that situation, if someone has studied a course that isn't strictly accredited or recognized by that assessing body, they will have to go through more hurdles, in order to get a positive assessment outcome, which is always annoying because people think that, oh, I've studied in Australia, so it must be recognized in Australia, right? But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And an applicant would need to be very, very careful about the requirements of the skills assessing body that they're applying for. That's lots of skills assessing bodies in Australia. Each of them govern a different set of occupations.
Yes.
So yeah, it's up to the candidate to actually find out, whether or not their course is accredited before even taking it, I think. Because if they took an accredited course, then that might help them a lot, in terms of getting their positive assessment. They won't have to maybe do too many things like writing, I think, like reports and writing like evidence that you can meet all their competencies. This is something that comes up quite a lot.
That's right. And the other thing that people get very confused is what is qualification recognition and what is skills assessment? Because sometimes you can get skills assessment, but not necessarily the recognition of their qualifications. So how does this work? What is the advantage of each? And what is the recommendation for each?
Skills assessments are used primarily for visa applications, okay? And in most skills assessing bodies' websites, you'll often see, it says skills assessment for migration, when the skills assessment is going to be used for visa application. Recognition of qualification, though, I think that applies more to applying for universities or colleges when you want to study something, or when you are looking into getting registered in Australia in a profession, for example, say like being a doctor or being a nurse or being a lawyer. Those requirements are usually set by professional bodies rather than assessing bodies as such. Different. Professional bodies are bodies that regulate those professions or occupations. In the case of like myself, we've got the Legal Practice Board of WA. They are the ones that control, who can call themselves a lawyer or legal practitioner in Australia, in Western Australia.
Okay.
So they are not the assessing body as such, because they just make sure that people have the right to actually practice in that field. Same with nurses. They are governed by APRA, which is the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. I believe that's what it stands for. So it's a regulator usually, because they want to make sure that people who provide these services in Australia have reached the requisite standard, of people who offer these services within the country. So it's a different but potentially confusing concept, because skills assessments are for visas again, and they're done by usually third-party contracted bodies. Whereas your qualification recognitions, that's for you to actually do the work in Australia for registration usually.
And how long?
So that's the distinction there. Yeah.
How long takes to get this assessment for skills in this case?
It depends on the body that is running the skills assessment. The most common one, VetAssess, unfortunately, is taking 20 weeks up to do the assessment.
So many people asking at the same time.
That's right. They're a bit backlogged at the moment, but it depends on the individual body who is offering the assessment. Oftentimes there is a priority processing option that people can select to try and shorten the processing time and pay a bit more. Yeah, it's hard to say though, but generally you expect at least 2 months, 1 to 2 months to get it done.
And normally, what's the average of putting a process to get skills assessed?
The process is gathering all your qualifications and gathering all your academic transcripts from your past qualifications, and also gathering any proof of work experience, including work references, pay slips. These two are the main ones, and also your CV as well. And of course, your identity documents like a passport, birth certificate, and national ID, if applicable, marriage certificate, these things. So you gather all the documents. That's the starting point. And then after that, you go and check whether or not you even meet the requirements of the individual assessing body, because they can greatly vary depending on what occupation you are wanting a skills assessment for, and also what the requirements of that individual assessing body is. Yeah, so it is a very case by case kind of thing. It's hard to really give a broad answer to that, but generally yes, you got to accumulate your proof of education and work experience, and then after that go and research what the requirements are, or you can speak to a professional and they can advise you on what's required.
Okay. And Ken, what is about the Australia qualification framework? What is this, and what they regulate, let's say this way, is a regulation body?
Okay, AQF, Australian Qualifications Framework. I have to first confess that I don't know too much about it. All I know about it though is that it's a way for them to determine the different levels of qualifications, educational qualifications that exist in Australia, and how qualifications from other countries compare to these qualifications, these standards in Australia. For example, I think one of the AQF levels, I think it's 7, I can't remember, because this is not something that we come across too much. I think one of the AQF levels pertains to, say, a bachelor degree, and that needs to be undergraduate, right? So they would use that as a basis to say, okay, in order to call yourself or call a course a bachelor degree, it needs to have at least this minimum number of like subjects, contact hours, units, and breadth of content, in order to call itself a bachelor of let's say science, or arts, whatever, right? So when they have those standards, they use that to sort of judge other countries' qualifications to see whether or not a bachelor degree in Brazil, for example, is also a bachelor degree, equivalent to a bachelor degree in Australia. Okay, so that's how it's used, to my understanding. And obviously the level of qualification that a migrant has is relevant to their visa as well, and the options that they have, because again, going back to ANSCO, the Australian New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations, ANSCO also spells out the minimum level of qualification that someone needs to have in order to say that they are in that occupation or they do that occupation. If it is determined that their qualification, even if it's called a bachelor, is only equivalent to, say, a diploma, and the occupation requires a bachelor degree, then they couldn't meet the ANSCO requirements for that visa, and that could result in a refusal. So that's the relevance of that there. Yeah.
Okay. So my next question to you.
Bit technical, but yeah.
You have many things to ask you, but we need to get another session later on to talk about about the new migration system. But regarding many people, they need support from a professional to help them because they don't understand the system, or because they don't know the language that is very specific to the situation, and they get overwhelmed. So who has the credentials, that has the right and to help someone in this with these issues like qualification recognition or skills assessment?
Okay.
Anyone can help, because the information is online, but the particularity of this, what is behind the scenes that we don't know, that is very particular, that can fail the person applying for a visa when they don't know the little detail. and then everything is
absolutely. Navigating it is absolutely challenging, because even us professionals sometimes find it challenging as well, because the information isn't always presented in a coherent and in a single place, right? So when it comes to, let's break down the answer to the question into two parts. You asked how to ascertain the requirements of certain qualification recognitions or regulatory bodies. I think the best way is probably just to contact the body itself in that respect, because migration agents and lawyers, they don't help with this. It's not really within our scope of practice. It's more part of the, I guess, the migration, the process of working in Australia. You know, it's not necessarily getting a visa as such, which is where most of our work is. I think the best way is probably to get in touch with the body itself. But better yet is if you know someone, again, going back to what I said earlier, if you know someone who has been through the process, that I find helps a lot, you know, because they can tell you exactly what they would be looking for in terms of getting your qualification recognized. If you're looking to determine whether or not your qualification can meet the entry requirements for a particular education institution, that's when an education agent could be helpful. So the term that we use here in Australia is QEAC. It's like a qualified education agent and counselor. I believe that's what it stands for. They would be probably the best people to help you with determining whether or not your qualification could meet the requirements for a particular institution, because they have agreements with all of these institutions and they are meant to know their requirements from back to front. And if they didn't know, they can always contact their person within that institution to find out what the deal is, right? So that's probably the first part of it. Contact the education agent if you're looking to enroll, or if you're looking to register, probably get in touch with the body itself, you know, or someone who has done it before. Usually these bodies are quite helpful and they are quite prescriptive with the requirements. That's another good thing about being in Australia, because everything is so set out, you know, everything is so regulated. So it kind of makes things a bit easier for people who are very good at following instructions, but people who get overwhelmed with information might find that a bit, crazy. Because there are, I think, many cultures in the world, many countries, they're just like, oh yeah, whatever, you know, more or less meets, you know, we'll just let you through. It's not like that in Australia. Australia is very, very precise with things. Sorry?
It's strategic as well. You need to sort of know the strategy, the process to be able to follow.
That's right. Everything is so procedural. And some people might perceive that as bureaucratic, you know. But in itself, you know, there's good and bad with everything, you know, it gives it structure. So generally these bodies are happy to help and give you clear direction. So that's the first part. So the second part is, if you're looking for more information about skills assessments, you can always start by doing research on the skills assessing body's website. They usually publish everything. Finding that information may be tricky, in which case you can also, if you want to save some money, get in touch with the body itself, and they are usually happy to give some advice on what documents are needed. What they won't do though is give you tailored, I guess, answers to solutions to whether or not your application is going to meet their requirements. In that case, I think best to speak to either a migration agent who does skills assessments or a migration lawyer who also does skills assessments, because not all of us actually do it. Some of us actually are like, nah, that's just too much work, you know, we'll just stick to visas. So I think it pays to, just ask around and see which ones are good at doing skills assessments and have that reputation of doing skills assessments. And that's where word of mouth referrals are very helpful. You know, because say, for example, I complete a good assessment for my client and it's successful, and they will then go on and tell their friend, and their friend will, you know, come and see me. Yeah, that's how it works.
And who gives the information about visa, or what do you need to do to become a permanent resident in Australia? Who is the responsible, or who is the person who has the credentials to talk about, like, if you're coming to me, look, you can get your residence in Australia this way. I am a career counselor. I'm not an agent or a lawyer. to give this kind of information. I can show there are possibilities, but I cannot give you the full detail.
Yeah, no, you can't give specific advice. You can only give general information. And the line between what is general advice and what is migration advice is not very clear either. So when in doubt, I would suggest that any person who is not clear about what visa pathways are available to them, speak to, either a practicing, migration lawyer who is actually, a specialist in that field, not necessarily an accredited specialist, but someone who has that deep experience in particularly migration law, because it's quite a broad area in itself. Or speak to a registered migration agent. Registered migration agent, I have to emphasize that, because there are a lot of people out there who claim to be migration agents, but they are not actually registered with OMARA. OMARA is Migration Agents Regulatory Authority, okay? And they are actually part of the government. So all registered migration agents must have a MARA number, so Migration Agent Registration Number. And those are the only people who are qualified to give migration advice other than migration lawyers in Australia.
Okay.
Outside of Australia, though, there are, I know, agents as well who are not necessarily registered. They can't be controlled by the Australian government, unfortunately. So we don't know whether or not the advice is good or not so good. The risk is that you pay a lot of money to an agent who doesn't really know what they're talking about. And then you end up putting in an application that is just may not even get lodged. I've heard so many stories.
Yeah.
Someone takes all your money and just runs off with it, or doesn't respond to you, or they put in an application that was bound to fail because it didn't meet all the requirements set out in legislation. So it's a bit of a hit or miss there. Some agents are better than others, but I'm talking about overseas agents. In Australia, if they're registered, you can trust them because they are meant to have all the knowledge necessary to provide migration advice. Or if you want to have, someone who is actually a practicing lawyer advise you on, migration matters, go and look for a migration, like immigration solicitor, or immigration lawyer, or a lawyer who has done migration for most or significant part of their work.
Yeah, so it's basically the same with the career practitioners, because career development is now regulated in Australia, and you need to be registered to be to work with careers. But many people are not registered, but they call themselves career coach or career whatever. And something that is people don't understand that is a body that regulated our like what we do. Right, and we have responsibilities. You pay liability to be able to be there and do the work that we do.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that for career counselors.
Yeah,
really.
many people don't know.
Yeah, it's good to know, because if anyone is looking for a career counselor, I absolutely have this at the back of my mind now.
Yeah, we have our buddy, our peak buddy is the council of industry careers in Australia.
Yeah. Okay. So it is regulated as well.
Yeah,
so
regulated.
I think part of what we do is educating people and informing them that there are people who are qualified, and allowed, the only people who are allowed to give this sort of advice, and to remind people not to seek help from potentially unscrupulous sources, because it's such a big deal. Career, as you said. Also, visa applications, migration, people can end up spending their life savings on this stuff and not get the outcome that they want. So, very important to be careful when seeking legal advice, and career advice.
Yeah, when you have a career, doesn't mean people come as desperate for a job. The job will not solve your problems. It's much more, it's a long life decision that you need to know what is involved in that situation. So of course, the job pays the bills, but doesn't mean that you require what you are expecting as a lifestyle for you in the country. So many things. So
absolutely, careers about personal fulfillment as well. So
yes, so you are wonderful. You gave lots of information, and I look forward to seeing you again and having the chatting again. But before you go, I need to ask you a question. coming to Australia, despite you have relatives in here, and we can find many food from Malaysia here. So what
Yes.
is your favorite Malaysian food that you, when you think about, is just like home for you?
I'm going to give a really cliched answer because I think most Malaysians would agree with me that our national dish is nasi lemak, fat rice. Yeah. But then again, it's so hard to choose. As you said, there's so many Malaysian restaurants in Perth, and really Malaysia is a multicultural country. So we have food from our three main big, races or ethnicities in Malaysia, Chinese, Malay, and Indian. So there's really gems to be found from every part, of Malaysia. So it's kind of hard to choose, if I would have just picked one. But yes, just for the sake of making answering the question, I'm still going to say that, yeah, probably nasi lemak is the best. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, and as you are a firm here in Australia, helping people that want to come to Australia, people that want to stay in Australia, where people can find you, Ken?
I am based in a law firm in Perth, Perth CBD, called Tang Law, TANGLEW. We're on the eastern end of St. George's Terrace, just opposite the Duxton Hotel. Or you can always give us a call at 0893287525, and we'd be more than happy to help you. We not only do migration, we have a very dedicated migration team led by Sophie, who you know, and we also do other areas of law as well, like family, civil, commercial, wills and estates. So if you have any legal needs, chances are we'd be able to help. And we're all very, very passionate and dedicated to our work.
And multicultural team.
Multicultural, absolutely, and multilingual as well. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's another theme that I would like to bring one of your colleagues if they are working specific in the area of wills, because for newcomers, the concept of having a will is a strange thing.
Yeah. Okay. Is it just because a lot of people are not aware of the need to have one, or just
the need, or how the system in Australia works?
I see.
Okay. Yeah, you need someone that can teach us, educate us about what is the advantage for you to have a will in Australia, what can save you by the end, because it's a headache if you don't have one, right? Especially if you have family here, family there, kids here, kids there. So you need to know if anything happens in that situation, what is the best solution that is quicker and can solve the situation in a smoothly way, instead of
the most cost-effective and efficient way. Yeah, absolutely.
Because the painful time, you don't have energy to deal with anything else than the situation that just happened. So what can you do? How can you be prepared or prepare others that live with you for that moment?
Yep, absolutely. All right. Yeah, absolutely. We have I know that our legal practice director is an expert on wills and estates. He's been doing this for a long time. I'll definitely approach him and ask him to contribute. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to do that.
So I have the Tang Law firm here with us as a team, like everyone giving information and helping us to understand how to live a better life in Australia with more feeling safe and feel that we understand the system much better.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and really, just another point I'd like to make about our firm as well. A lot of us here are actually also migrants ourselves, so we do understand that experience of coming from a faraway land, and but at the same time, we've all obviously done a lot, and worked very hard to get to the place that we're at today. So yes, I think that part of it we can always empathize with new migrants, migrants who've been here for a while, and most importantly though, but we have the right knowledge and expertise and experience to advise correctly, rather than just saying something and assuming that something's right, even if it may not be. So that's probably the most important thing. Looking for advice, you want to make sure that you're dealing with people who actually know what they're talking about, because you get the wrong advice, that's it, everything can just go downhill from there. And I think that is a big part of coming to a new country is getting the right assistance, even if you might have to pay for it. But think of it this way, do you want to get an amateur or a professional mechanic to fix your car, right?
Yeah.
You
don't go to a mechanic to fix your teeth, right? They have tools as well.
That's it. Exactly. Right tool, right person for the job.
That's right. So you gave the question that I would ask, the advice that you give. So you just gave the advice to people that are here or want to come to Australia, that get to know the information and get someone to help you when you don't.
Yeah. There's so much more I'd like to share, but I think we've gone on for a while now. Because the conversation's been very engaging.
We come back together because after the 1st of July is when everything will be set for the...
Not necessarily the 1st of July. There will be major changes from the 1st of July, but a lot of them will be introduced over the course of the months after July. There are things that have already been confirmed. For example, the temporary skilled migration income threshold, that's going up for sure. The UK free trade agreement, that's also already been implemented, and then also expanded pathways to PR. So it's going to roll out in a sort of a staged and gradual way. It won't all come, on the 1st of July. Yeah, it's just the government just can't do that. I don't think they have the capacity to do it. So it's going to be an ongoing process, and obviously, us working in this field, we have to be on top of it. And as we move along, I'd be more than happy to share, the changes, the updates, as much as people want to know about it.
That's right. So it is the hook for the next session then. That you have.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for sharing your journey as a newcomer and how you made yourself feel comfortable here in Australia and doing what you now do so well, and for helping us to understand more about the system and the requirements. And I'm sure we will learn even more when you have our next conversation. So thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. And thank you so much for having me. I hope this session has been, at least somewhat helpful for, those migrants who are thinking of moving to Australia, particularly, people who have work experience and qualifications. And I absolutely look forward to sharing more with you and your audience. Sema, I really appreciate it. You've been lovely to talk to. Until next time.
Likewise. So thank you very much for watching the episode today with Ken Chong and talking about his life and also his ability as a migration lawyer. So see you next time, and bye-bye.